Hi, this is Dr. Georgia. I hope you find today's message a blessing in your life. We want to make sure that we continue to provide these video messages for you when you can't come to church, or for those of you who live in a different state, or we noticed recently we have a lot of people in even different countries who are tuning in. So if that is you and you can donate to us, we invite you to hit that donate button just below the message here. So thanks so much. Put your hand over your eyes. Let's get prepared. I open my eyes to see the spiritual truth today.
I open my eyes to see the spiritual truth today.
Now over your ear, I open my ears to hear the spiritual truth today.
I open my ears to hear the spiritual truth today.
Now just open your hearts. Just extend out your arms. I open my heart to receive the spiritual truth today.
I open my heart to receive the spiritual truth today.
The spiritual truth that I'm working with today is that with God all things are possible. With God all things are possible. If you want more success in your life, stop trying to do it alone. Bring in the Almighty infinite intelligence, the Almighty divine wisdom. Bring that in. With God all things are possible. Today's spiritual truth comes from the Bible. In the beginning of it, it says, with man, some things are not possible, but with God, all things are possible. See, sometimes I think we rely on our friends and those people we know, and when they don't come through for us in the way that we hope, or the way we need, or the way we expect, what happens is we give up. We turn, go to God. With God, all things are possible. With God, it's possible to have enough self-confidence to walk in any room at any time and know you're in the right place at the right time. With God, it's possible to have enough money that you can actually call some of it extra. With God, it's possible to commit to going to a gym and go to the gym and actually like going to the gym. With God, all things are possible. With God, it's possible to learn how to forgive immediately and often as you need. With God, it's possible to understand that you're the only person who gets to define you. Nobody else gets to define who it is that you are. And sometimes it takes courage to stand up in front of scary people and say, this is who I am. This is who I am. Because oftentimes people around us think they get a vote. And sometimes people around us think they get the majority vote as to who it is that we are in our life. So today we're going to go to our ancestors and look for some help in this idea of defining ourselves and relying on God to give us the help that we need. Today's celebration comes from Judaism. It is a holiday that demonstrates perfectly this idea that with God, all things are possible. So if you're joining us today, we're in the month of December. We celebrate all of the holidays on the religious year that celebrate the light that you are. We started out with Bodhi Day, which is the day of the enlightenment of the Buddha. And today we're going to go to Hanukkah, then we're going to go to Winter Solstice, Christmas, and Kwanzaa. All of them celebrating the light that you are on this planet. Now, it's important for me to say this every year. Hanukkah is not a replacement holiday. It's not a holiday that was thought up by some Jewish parents that were worried that their kids were going to get left out at Christmas because they didn't have anything to do, no presents to have. That's not what Hanukkah is about. It's a beautiful holiday all on its own. We're going to dig into it, but one of the ways that we respect these traditions, because we're not trying to become these traditions, we're trying to learn from these traditions the spiritual nourishment that's available to all of us. So we pay respect by having an altar and by blessing the altar. And I'm going to invite one of our teens, Andia Kiburi, up to bless the altar. Ayana? The other way we show respect to this holiday is by doing what Jews are doing all over the United States and all over the world starting Tuesday night. We lit all of the Hanukkah candles tonight. Usually they're lit one a day for 8 days, and it starts next Tuesday. But we pay respect to this particular holiday, doing what Jewish families do all over the world, and that is tell the story. They tell the story every single year. And they do that to teach their young both their heritage, but not only the heritage, but some spiritual wisdom that's available within this holiday. So we're going to do the same thing. Now here is the thing. If you have been coming for a while, I want you to resist the temptation to fall asleep during this next 20 minutes. Because you're going to think, I've heard it, I know it. Or maybe some of you are Jewish and you know, I've heard this story since I was 8. These people have only started hearing this story for the last 15 years since she's been doing this. Look, the story will not change. And much of what I say about this story will not change. Every year you're going to hear the same thing. Here's what changes. You are not the same person who heard this story a year ago or 2 years ago or 3 years ago. And I promise you this. If you will stay awake and alert during the talk, during the sermon, the stories, you will walk out of here with some spiritual nourishment you didn't even know you needed. But it's here in this story. So let's get started. As with many stories, and by the way, one of my favorite Jewish proverbs is, God so loved stories that he invented people. And I think that's kind of true. The story started out like a lot of victim to victory stories go. And that is, things are okay, they're not bad, they're all right, and then something happens, an event happens to make them even better. It's God's way of keeping us from becoming complacent. You know, because sometimes when things are okay, we just kind of go along. And then something happens, and it feels terrible at the time. But in the healing process, we are so much stronger. So for something to go from okay to great, we need to look at what could happen in our life. Life was good for the Jews under the leadership of Alexander the Great. He was a guy who let people be people. He didn't hassle them. Now, he didn't set them free either, but he didn't hassle them. Alexander respected the way the Jews worshipped. He allowed them to dress the way they wanted to dress, to eat what they wanted to eat, and to live in peace. He allowed them to build a beautiful temple on a hillside above Jerusalem. And in that temple, they put a beautiful ark, which is simply a box that's decorated to house the scrolls, the ancient scrolls. And they had a candle. The candle never went out. It was lit 24/7 with the notion that people would understand that God is on the job 24/7. Never goes to sleep, never goes out. And so that's how they were living at the time. Still, while it wasn't terrible, again, under Alexander, they were not free. They were dependent on his benevolence. And that's no way to live. Being dependent on somebody else's benevolence is never a way to live. And I wonder how many of us in this room, I've certainly at times lived under somebody else's benevolence. And I suspect there might be people in the church right now. You know something needs to be said. You know a truth needs to be told, but you don't tell it because you don't want to rock the boat. You don't want to make things worse. That's not freedom. That's not freedom. Maybe it's your spouse. Something needs to be said to your spouse. Maybe it's your boss. Something needs to be said. It's not terrible, but something wants to be said. If you're in any of those situations, maybe it's your adult children, I don't know who it is, but a lot of us are living under the benevolence of somebody else because we don't want to rock the boat. If that's true for you, you need to listen very carefully to the next part, and that is this. If you are not free, your soul will beg an invitation for some event or some person to come into your life and do something that you have to speak up about or run away. Let me say that again because it's so important. If you are living under the benevolence of somebody else, if you are afraid to rock anybody's boat, but something needs to be said, your soul will invite a situation into your life that will require you to stand up or run away. Now the problem with running away is this. Everywhere you go, there you are. And so you're going to invite new people in. Same personality, same issues, different faces to come into your life. Well, what this communal soul of the Jews invited into their life was the death of the benevolent Alexander the Great, to be replaced by an anti-Semite named Antiochus. Antiochus was fearful of the Jews. He was fearful of how they dressed, how they ate, how they worshipped, the language they spoke, and most of all, that they had one God. Where the Greeks had many, many gods, the Jews had one God. Alexander, now, and here's what we want to remember. We are always all parts of every sacred scripture. All the parts. Whether it comes from the Torah, or the Bible, or the Bhagavad Gita, or the Quran, we are all parts of those stories in our consciousness, in our life. We're Alexander the Great when we let other people be who they want to be. How they dress, we don't care. How they talk, we don't care. Who they love, we don't care. We just keep moving on in our life. That's when we're channeling Alexander the Great. We're challenging Antiochus when we see today's violence against people of color, against trans people, against Muslims, against immigrants. That's when we're channeling the Antiochuses of the world. We forget that God comes in all sizes, all shapes, all colors, all ways of speaking, all lifestyles. When we try and limit somebody else, even in our consciousness, we don't speak it. We're smart enough now not to speak it, but in our consciousness, we've tried to limit people because we are fearful of them or we don't understand them. When we do that in our life, and maybe it's, maybe it's a rapper, or maybe it's an evangelical talk show host, or conservative radio show host, or whoever it is. When we try and limit somebody else's expression, we do two things. We hurt ourselves. Whenever you have that garbage in your consciousness, you hurt yourself. And eventually you'll hurt other people. But the other thing that happens is we run the risk of missing a blessing in our life when we try and limit other people, when we judge other people to be over there. When I first stepped into a recovery meeting for alcoholism, I was in trouble. I was hurting. I had no idea how I was going to get through the next 24 hours without a drink. And I walked into that room, and nobody looked like me. I suspected nobody loved by me, like me. And I sat next to a woman. Her name was Chrysler. She introduced herself. Hi, my name's Chrysler Sal. And I thought, oh my God. And then I looked at her, and she had this hair. It was in the days of, this is 40 years ago, so it was a long time ago. She had this hair that was out to here. It was blonde. And the interesting thing about the hair, I could barely hear what it was saying because every time she moved, her whole head moved. It was all teased up and sprayed up. I'm telling you, I had not one thing in common with this woman. Not one thing in common with her. She was married to a guy named Saddleback Charlie. Saddleback Charlie and Chrysler Sal. I said, where am I? And do you know what? She saved my life. She helped me figure out how I was going to get through the next 24 hours without a drink. And the 24 hours after that, and the 24 hours after that. And I could have dismissed her. Had I not been so desperate, I would have said, she has nothing to teach me, we run the risk of missing a blessing. Well, Antiochus dealt with his fear by forbidding the Jews to worship on their Sabbath, to worship the God of their understanding. He brought in a statue of Zeus and into the big the temple that I told you about, and he brought in a pig and he slaughtered the pig so that the blood ran all over the temple and all over the beautiful ark and the scrolls that they had, and it was quite an event in their life. But here's the thing about forbidding. Forbidding does not work. It might work in the short term, but in the long term, forbidding will never work. If it's something that hurts people in their lives. If forbidding worked, we probably would still have slavery. We would have internment camps in our life. I'd be straight if it worked. The presence of God, when we see it inside of ourselves, and we get that with God all things are possible, when we get that in our life, we become too strong. We become stronger than any fear-activated limitation in our life. We can even stand up to scary-looking people and say, this is who I am. This is who I am. I'm here on purpose, and God loves me. That's what we get to say when we understand that with God all things are possible. So the Jews, Antiochus would take his men and he would go to the villages and he would make the men come to the village, line up, and bow down in front of these statues of Zeus. And some of them did. And what's important for us to know is we need to have compassion for those people who are afraid and doing something that we, in retrospect, think is wrong. Because every single person in this room, my guess is, you've all tried to pass as something because you didn't feel safe. Maybe you tried to pass as somebody who went to college when you didn't. Maybe you tried to pass as somebody who never popped their kids when you did. Maybe you tried to pass as somebody who likes hip-hop when you really don't like hip-hop. Whatever it is, I don't know what it is. But we all have something that we've tried to pass as to make ourselves feel better in our lives. You know, it takes courage to stand up and to say, I am a child of God. God is well pleased in me. And there was one man who did just that. He stood up and he said, no, I'm not going to bend down. I know who I am, and I'm just not going to do it. Whoever is for God's law, follow me. And 5 guys did. They were his sons. Nobody else would do it. And nobody else would do it because it didn't make sense at the time that they could possibly beat this whole army of people. They thought what we call in religious science, they did what we call thinking beyond common sense. Thinking beyond common sense. Common sense is no more than the sum total of what everybody else is thinking. That's what common sense is. You know, the women who have caught on to the hashtag #MeToo, they're thinking beyond common sense. The people who think there's a chance for peace in the Middle East, they're thinking beyond common sense. You know, there's a belief that kids don't leave gangs. I'm telling you that every single day there are strong kids who are walking out of gang life and living whole entire new lives. Is it hard? Yes. Is it scary? Yes. But people are doing it, and this fellow did it. Well, Maccabee, the word Maccabee translates to hammer, the word hammer. And that's what they were. They were hammerers. They would get out, they would go to the caves. Now, there were 5 of them to begin with, plus the dad. 5 sons and the dad were the Maccabees. They would go into the caves during the day. They would come out at night, and they would hammer back the army. And as they became more successful, the law of attraction began to kick in, and other people began to join them. And we want to remember that, because when we're out there doing something scary, if we will have the courage to stick with it for a while, other people will join us. Why? Because it feels good to do the right thing. And that's what he did. Other people began to join him. So they would go into the caves in the day and come out at night and just hammer back, hammer back, hammer back. It's important because, we sometimes get the idea that we can change our lives in the twinkling of an eye. And of course we can. But more often than not, it's going to take a hammering. If you think that you can, with one say of an affirmation, kill all of 30 years of I'm not enough, I don't believe it's going to happen. You got to hammer at that affirmation, and hammer at it, and hammer at it, and hammer at it, until it comes to be in your life. Well, that's what they did. They hammered, they got more successful, and Antiochus said, you know what, I'm done with this. I don't want this anymore. I'm going to bring my whole entire army, and we're going to get rid of these guys. And so he brings them in the day. Now, you can't move an entire army without people knowing about it. So the Maccabees knew exactly what day they were going to have this battle. And so the morning came, and Antiochus' men got up, and they began to armor themselves. This is an important part of the story for us, because every day our work is not to get up and armor ourselves with our kind of armor, which is, sharpening up our blamer, or getting our stories all organized, or making up our excuse list. That's our armor. Our job is not to get up and armor ourselves. Our job is to get up and say, with God, all things are possible, and this is how I want this day to go. And I believe it will happen. Well, the story is that because they took so long to get their armor on, the Maccabees, who traveled light, would just go in and they won the battle. They sent them off. They sent the Antiochus and his army off. And then they did what is actually most often considered the point of the story. They went back into the temple, and they did something you and I need to learn how to do better. And that is, when they saw the devastation, when they felt the pain of what was happening, had happened already, they wept. They wept. Not a fake weeping. Fake weeping is alcohol, hiding behind booze. That's fake weeping. Fake weeping is hiding behind marijuana. That's fake weeping. Fake weeping is hiding in food. That's fake weeping. Fake weeping is getting on the internet and not getting off. That's fake weeping. They didn't do fake weeping. They wept. They wept until they were done weeping. And when they were done weeping, they did what all of us do. They got busy putting their lives back together, putting the temple back together. And as they did that, they realized they could clean the scrolls, they could rebuild the ark, they could replace the windows, they could sweep the floors and mop them, but the candle had been blown out. And they only had enough oil for one day. And it would take 8 days to make more oil. Now here's the most important part of the whole story for us. They did not wait until things were perfect to light the candle. They didn't wait till they had 8 days. They had a plan, but they did not wait until that plan was executed. They started right away. They took what they had and they began. They lit the candle. That's what you and I need to do. If we have a project in the work, don't worry until every pencil is sharpened. Get started. If you're on your 4th step, don't wait until every piece of paper is properly in line. Get started. Whatever it is. If you want to do something that will enhance your marriage, but you're a little unsure, Get started. Light that candle and get moving. We're a church of people who take God's nourishment and take it out into the community and begin to live a better life. Not for ourselves only, but that too, but for the world. Let's take this message into prayer, knowing that there's only one power. It's God's power, and I give thanks for it. I give thanks for every single person who feels the power, who enhances the power, who allows the power to run through them. I give thanks for that. I release this word into the law, and together we say,